Ben? Ben,
Only got 2 of 4 corners, so. So we got 2 corners.
So it's the Wiley kind of
You
like.
could be the other 2, we gotta be.
All right, good evening, everybody. Welcome. You all have a quorum. Hey, you need to call your meeting to order. And I will call to order this special meeting of the Village of Trumansburg Board of Trustees. We don't have anything to change on the agenda, do we?
Not that I'm aware of.
Hope not. Okay. So fire and EMS budget time. As always, we will start with, does anyone have anything that you need to announce or? Okay. As always, we'll start with fire. Fire tends to be fairly straightforward. I thought we would simply start with, unless anyone else wants to do it any differently, we would simply start with the main budget and look at lines that have changed. If there's questions about lines that haven't changed, that you have any questions about, or questions for Chief Taylor or Deputy Chief Shearer as to what goes into those lines, what is that money spent on, feel free to ask. But I thought we'd at least start with the changes. First line, personal. That's we the village allocate a portion of front office staff salaries to each village department. So there's a small portion of what the 2 Jessicas are paid. I don't know if there's anyone else. Small portion that's allocated to fire and EMS for their admin time. So that increase simply reflects increase in wages. There's no shift in, we haven't shifted anything to fire from anywhere else. It's just a wage increase. What's that? Yeah, so Williamson, for whatever reason, calls it personal. I've asked that question for years and no one's been able to give
So
me.
did the OSC.
No one's been able to tell me why it's personal and not personnel, but. The next line that changes is contractual. I'll let Chief Taylor or Dan, either one of you.
So I think what I usually do is I look at my expended lines and then I try to adjust for expenditures in those lines. So we had adopted 8,000, ended up being overspent by about 3,300 and change. This year we're at 7, so hopefully things don't continue on that trend. 10% or better, 15% up. So that's why you see try to split the difference.
And that's mostly stuff for the building.
Yes,
Contractual.
contractual catches everything that doesn't really kind of fall into other things. It could be building expense, it could be more equipment if we're out of the line there. It could be like you know, if we've got to get like the generator repaired, which can be under contract and things of that nature.
Okay. Gas and electric is self-explanatory. Training line has come down a little bit. Turnout gear and gear maintenance, it's gone up just by $1,000. Gear gets more expensive each year. Small equipment, same idea. Equipment replacement. Try to keep pace with increases in costs. Vehicle repair. Any comment there, Matt, on?
We put it in vehicle repair, but 04 is turning. So we did notice quite a bit of body rust on that truck now, so that's gonna have to go in for repairs. So Like, late this year and then maybe in next year or something. That's what that's carrying through. Trying to maintain trucks and whatnot.
We see a slight increase in insurances, as does everyone. Office supplies have come down just a bit. Fuel is holding steady. Phones, there's a slight increase in cost. And then that last line, fire, medical, hospital, that's a portion of health insurance from the front office. Yes.
Yeah, that percent change, I can't verify, but I was looking to see if I did that right, but that is, yeah, based on actual and that medical and hospital expenses are expected to increase 18% over current. I questioned that 117, Rich, you found my error. But yeah. I didn't update that equation, I think. But yeah, 676 is based on 18% over expected for this year. From the adopted contract, but it's, yeah, it's, oh, so it isn't wrong then. Okay, yeah, it just looks scary because the expended was more than budgeted.
And then we have reserve lines with no changes except to the apparatus. Yeah.
Yep. So that's 2024, so I didn't add the line where I'm looking at the projected for the current. So that column has not ever been added into these calculations, the projected for fire for 25, 26, but it's based on that. Yeah, I'll make a note to see if you folks want to see that for next year.
Reserve lines, the only one with an increase is apparatus, as we all know. Vehicles and equipment, very expensive. When is the one we ordered? That's this fall? No, spring.
Spring next year. Spring.
And what was the ticket? What was the price tag on that one? Remind me.
It's 3 years.
So we'll be dropping 860 out of that 1.1 million that's in that reserve line. That'll leave us 140, 240, 270 and 250. So we'll be a little over 500. And the next one we're looking to get is 28, 29. We had leased 2 in the last 12. When would we get the Quint? 2011, 2012. We had the ladder truck. Yeah, we've leased 2 in our history, and that was with nearly 0 interest. And there's no 0. The only financing available would have interest rates that are higher than we would want to take. So we did do 2 leases. We'd never leased before until 2011 or 2012. And I think we got a 0 interest lease on that one. The second one, there might have been some small interest, but now they're much higher. I mean, we'll always look at it if interest rates come down enough. We'll always look at it as an option. But reserving enough to pay outright is ideal if we can, because then we get resale value when we sell it. So it'll be in.
Army truckers, because we've actually had affected that value. But if you can spread that,
Yeah. When I say lease, I mean lease to own. So that I think there were 7 years with a balloon. So it wasn't the way we lease a vehicle. It was a lease to own. So it was I call it a lease, but it was financing. I think the ladder truck was 7 year. Might have only been 5 or 7. So yeah, if offered good deals, we'll always look at it that way.
might be better. For 8 or 29.
Yeah. Well, and we may have to, depending on what the price tag is.
Yes,
What's that?
it'll be so, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it'll be over 1 million.
Questions? $45,000 total increase. 25 of that is the reserve line, so that leaves 20 spread out in the rest of the budget. 9 of that is also vehicle related. Don't make this Matt's quickest fire budget ever. Somebody's got to have some fun.
So I would note that you guys do a good job into the budget. Or, your show. And I appreciate that the go over budget, you don't come back, but you are consistently coming. With no future saving, is that money being put into reserves for the fire?
Usually it's encumbered forward for a spend, an anticipated spend. So if you don't have this year's, of course, we're only a few months into this year. We'd have to go back and look, but for instance, in 24, 25, we were, call it 11,000 under budget. I believe we encumbered that forward for something for a purchase. I just don't recall what it was.
It was gear. Yep.
So we try to play that fairly close to the line with whatever spending, whatever needs to be bought.
So you're covering it in the next budget cycle? Or you're
Yes,
covering it in that one?
I'm encumbering it into the next one. We're carrying it forward into the next one. But it doesn't necessarily show up in the adopted contract. It'll just come out as a village spend.
I think personally, I would like to see that level of detail be added simply because I think it's, those are good goals, right up your budget, right? Not overseeing the.
Okay. Other comments, questions?
Top fire chief. Fire.
Thank you. First changes, so there's changes on this is my last year's credit over the percentage. So hopefully taking over the range, that's why. As a whole, I think it always comes down to volunteers at the end of the day. We've got 43-ish on the book right now. For all that 21 years when I started, it was over 90. So you roll those numbers out, guys, and it's having harvest like this. That puts us in one years from now. So hopefully we can bump that price a little bit and get some more volunteers. This was the budget. Same Chinese features, but that's what also.
Mm-hmm.
Involved with our services, it's done. That's not an exaggeration, it's we are very lucky to have excellent employee.
But I don't see that.
And strong departments around us. Fill in those gaps, personnel needs, but it's not a pretty picture. We talk a lot about recruitment strategy, talk about, how we want people in door, how we retain them. One of the conversations we're having on this, notion of the fire station.
That part of how we make that happen, I guess. But one of the benefits of that happening someday. And so it's not a big picture. I'm not gonna mince words about it. I've been for 15 years and it's probably the lowest, the fitness roster I've ever seen. In my time. We are. Those of us that are here though are really good. So, you're in safe hands, but yeah, we are, you know, that's the hardest question that we are constantly trying to find the answer to work on this, but it's a tough one, and if you guys, you know, come across something that seems like a good idea for us and have ideas of how we could boost our numbers here, we'd love to hear that. This group talking about it.
Call volume is.
It's an all hands on deck. So if there's applications out there, if you guys want to grab them on your way out.
Yeah, my first fire budget was a long time ago, but you had 98 members. I just remember that number, 98 active members, and now you're at 43. The good news is, and not to sound ageist, but the average age of the 43 is lower than the average age of the 98.
That is a way that we do bump with the trend. Most of the agencies, Terra just simply.
So and those of you who I've had this conversation with over time, I am not optimistic about what things look like from a volunteerism standpoint in 20 years.
Yeah.
But we'll keep pushing as long as we can keep pushing. We're not going to jump the gun on non-volunteer. We're going to do what we can and recruit how we can. And I think the work that the fire company does at the school, and you know, you do have some young members, you know, if they stick around and don't move to warmer climates or go to school and become rich and famous somewhere, then you know, maybe they stick around. I think that's the best hope we have on that front. And it speaks to, which we'll get into on the EMS conversation, it speaks to some things that I'm going to ask you all, which I've asked in the past. It's not new, but it speaks to some things that I'm hopefully you can all help with our state and county representatives who continue to labor under the completely ill-informed belief that there's something that can be done to reinvigorate volunteerism to levels that will matter. It's a pipe dream, and unfortunately, we need real solutions, not pipe dreams. But I'll get to that.
I think the big thing is the state came out with a reimbursement program. Also, certain state.
What you said is
The issue is this is a long haul meeting. Like you come in at 18 years old as a senior in high school, in 4 or 5 classes, probably about 4 or 5 grand, $6 grand in reimbursement dollars. But it's not tied to longevity. So, you know, 2 years, 3 years they go to college, and gone, everyone's gone with it, and they don't come back to the community. At the end of the day, it's like people are leaving small communities for either Richard, Warner, areas that, you know, they take, so the state's thought is they can give them this money, they'll join, right? Well, that's great, you have a huge influx, but then it's like it slopes back off again. You know, we have a big influx there. So we're constantly in motion, trying to get people up to speed, get them to respond, get them through the classes, and then they just set them out, or they end up somewhere else. Stay, I'm not saying you don't stay in the north, I'm just saying they don't stay in certain. That's the bigger conversation, yeah, yes, state representative is. This is really great to get you in the door about how to use this.
This work takes years to build. Years of experience. You can take all the classes in the world, it's not gonna get you ready. So retention is that's the high quality fire service.
Is this trend for the volunteers with the same, the paid fire, is that decreasing or is that still
He wants to be the police officer anymore, so he just goes to fight.
Yeah.
I, not from, you know, we have a bunch of career, thankfully, volunteers between career, that was career firefighters. You know, a lot of career firefighters in the area, it doesn't seem to be the same problem for them. They have other problems, getting contracts, things like that, but in terms of, you know. When I'm completely people working out, it's such a problem with that.
But so do those young people or old people, whatever, that are interested in becoming paid fire people? I mean, do they volunteer
A lot of, yeah, a lot of. Yeah.
Mhm.
for that or during or?
Sometimes, yeah, it can depend on the person, you know, and it's also, it's I think tricky for career firefighters to really commit fully to a volunteer fire department. Jay's holds them, you know. But,
There's a few anomalies, but think about it, right? You go do it 48 hours a week, you know, and then go and do it for free for.
Because their work is just as hard, I mean, it's hard, but, you know, so they just, you understand how they might not come around as much.
We do the same as paid firefighters in our spare time. They do the full time. It's a job. So, yeah, I think that's the big thing, so, you know. Recruitment and retention is the big one, recruitment, state's kind of helping out with it, the retention is the big piece. Because in 20 years, everybody that's running it now has time down, you know, so. There's maybe not being. I know this guy,
Mhm.
so, you know, but Jack's still around, but whole families in the mountain.
Okay, comments or questions for Dan and Matt? We've got the contracts on page 2. Most of you will recall that we moved to a different split model for fire in particular, because there's a tremendous fixed cost to running a fire department. A lot of apparatus, a lot of buildings. We don't have payroll, thankfully, at least not yet. So basing call splits purely on call volume is one way to do things. It's the way we had done things historically, but a few years ago, we began to modify that split to take into account. Frankly, eventually it will be a smoothing constant once we're at our new split, because most of the costs are fixed. Getting there was a big change. And so we are in year 4 of a 5-year phase in of that new budgeting model. The last or the bottom sheet with a blue highlighted column, 5-year phased approach, that blue column will be the contract numbers for the towns. It'll be calendar 2026. And so you can see the increases there. Happy to take questions and try to revisit the details of the formula. Or make Ben Darth look at it. Yes, there ought to be. One right here. Anything, anyone? I don't want to shortchange anyone's time if you have questions, but I also No need to linger before moving on to EMS if you don't have questions.
I got a question.
Yeah.
This kind of off subject that was there, we're talking about merging or, you know, taking part of the Guilford territory there.
Yeah, so we're,
Guilford wants to know when that's happening, or Alec wants to know.
I think we were waiting for something from Jim. As far as, yeah, you guys are gonna give us the contract.
You wanna-
On that contract, you'll have the new boundary lines.
Okay,
'Cause
I think they're waiting on you, so I guess we gotta get together and
Okay.
work harder on this.
Anytime.
We got, we're waiting on our 100% assessment, we're now 100%.
Okay.
Sample to that, we can do it. Had to sit down and somebody's writing up a contract. and go, okay, good.
Well, I think it should be in the village contract, right? The boundary lines are all in. Here are the contracts, so we just gotta make some verbiage changes.
Right, like. We'll go, yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Am I gonna do that or?
Oh, who writes your contract?
Pat? Never change it. All right.
We charge you for every 15 minutes.
All right.
I mean, let me know what you need, Mike.
All right, I'll get Pat working on, see if he's got questions, I'll put back. All right, thank you.
It'll be whatever you have signed the next.
Whenever we get it together, so I don't know.
So to give
How
everybody.
fast he. Yeah, we'll just use. So there.
All right.
So I don't know how quick we can get it done.
That's like how that would affect the budget.
Don't think that.
I mean, if it increases calls to that side of covert, then we'll shift a little bit over time, but
It won't increase for us because we're using district. So technically, right now, we go down, we come off of, China Road. We're gonna come back up to 96 and we picked up that triangle. So when I talked to Jack Wolf about it, the reason it always was East Coast Road was the line. And we picked up Shire because when we were 100% volunteer ambulance, there was a person down there that went 5 times a week. You know, to get paid for that portion of that piece. So that's why it was changed. Like, I don't know, probably 30 years ago.
Gotta be 30, way before me.
Yeah, before me. So Jim Gordon had approached me about just re-squaring it off, because what happens is we own one side of 96, they own another side. Somebody gets in a wreck, depends on which address they call in on what side of the road. So to make everything straight, it was east or west Cove Road would become the line. And everything north of that would be interrelated, and everything south of Trumansburg.
So you're not talking about a big change.
Down,
No.
That's what I was.
2 square miles, maybe at most, so. But I don't know. Budget-wise, how that affects the dollars, because it doesn't really.
No.
it all depends on how many calls you get in that.
Right,
area.
it would be call volume.
Oh,
So that's good.
stuff, sale is gonna change.
Yeah. Have that. Rest of our.
Right.
Michael Jordan's house isn't on that block, so it's tip the scale's real big, I don't think.
I don't.
Get down the lake, it gets more hot.
Yeah.
Right.
It's nighttime. It's that triangle down and up and back, so there might be 1,000 houses on that little square.
Right, that is all.
But we can figure that out.
Yeah.
Have that figured that out.
I just like to know, since we would have used everything. And double defense, frankly, every dollar and shape up our budget. Shape up and.
I appreciate that.
Other comments or questions? Be good on fire. Okay. Everyone's favorite budget in the world.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
You know, stick around, I'll see one. Sunday, I gotta actually run.
Before we get into the nitty gritty of the budget, I have handouts. First, we'll start with what I call Rich's spreadsheet. Send one to covert. And one to Hector, a couple to Ulysses down there. This sheet goes back, we were only able to go back, actually, I only asked to go back 10 years. This shows, this sheet shows over underage by year in the EMS budget. The town contract column, second from the right, shows how much we were over or under budget relative to what the towns were charged. This column to the left of that shows how much we were over or under based on how the village built out its budget the spring after the town signed the contract. So you'll recall there were some years where we modified the EMS budget in the village budget, sometimes decreasing it slightly, sometimes needing to increase it slightly. So that's the reason why those two numbers are different. Net, what it shows is that over the last 10 years, deficit is spelled wrong, we'll ignore that. Over the last 10 years, the amount charged to the towns has been $35,000 more than was needed to be spent, which statistically is basically zero. However, the village has spent $219,000 more than the cumulative budgets over that time, primarily due to overtime. And you see, if those two numbers were equal, that means we would have been attempting to recoup that from the towns. So year to year, you can see big overages, or you can see the occasional. A few years ago, I think it was 2021, 2022. In particular, we had some conversations about shouldn't the village be returning that surplus to the towns? The answer is we do, over a decade. And so I wanted to take a look at that because we're in a phase now, last year and again this year, where we are significantly over budget. I don't see that necessarily. I see it moderating, but this past year, there were some legal expenses as well. But yes, anytime you see a large overage, it's almost always payroll related. Which leads to my second handout, which is everybody's favorite. This should be one for everyone. While the fire district is not growing except for road adjustments based on effectively convenience. We can expect, unless something dramatic changes, we can expect the ambulance district, the de facto ambulance district, and Rachel's going to want one. The de facto ambulance district is growing, and I'm trying to figure out a way to stop it from growing. And I am routinely frustrated by a sense that people who should be listening aren't, or worse, people who should be listening think they know better. The black line on this map represents the contracted areas, Covert, Ulysses, and the 2 Hector districts. Purple dots are responses. This is calendar 2024. And so you'll see all the purple dots to the south, a handful to the north and west. I think we're in the 15 to 20% range now of calls that are being responded to out of district. That does mean that when we're responding to, and Joel, feel free to jump in and elaborate if I miss anything. When we are responding to a call out of district, during the day, we may still have coverage in district based on some staffing changes Joel has done where he can staff for a second call on an as needed basis, which does impact payroll, but it's not quite the same as having a full-time second crew staff. There are, however, times of day, particularly at night, if we're responding out of district where we don't have a single ambulance, another ambulance staffed to provide coverage in district. I am considering, there's two things. One is Tompkins County is considering revising or has actually filed for approval with the Regional EMS Council, filed for approval for a change to the mutual aid contract, which would allow for an agency with only one staffed ambulance to decline a mutual aid call. If that's approved, we would sign it. I'm also considering what to me is a bit of a nuclear option, which is if Tompkins County in particular doesn't do more to manage what I believe is a very tenuous EMS situation, that I would look to enact, which state law does allow, would look to enact agency policy, which would decline mutual aid if we only have one staffed ambulance. That move, however, will ruffle lots and lots of feathers from Department of Emergency Response to other counties' emergency response departments to other agencies. At least a county written mutual aid agreement would take a little bit of the heat off of the village because we're signing it. That's really all I know to do, because the alternative is we are going to continue to respond more and more out of district.
Do we get revenue?
I'm sorry.
We get revenue into that?
We do bill for the transports if they occur. But that revenue is only on the insurance billing. There's no revenue coming from the county and there's no revenue coming from the municipality into which we respond. And there sure as hell is no revenue coming from banks. So for whatever reason, if we respond to a call in an area that is not our district, the only potential revenue is if there's a transport and we bill the insurance company for that ambulance ride. I think we're still billing about 2/3 of our calls. But if they're Medicare or Medicaid calls, the reimbursement rate is 10% of the cost. So this is something I know Caitlin is keyed in on this conversation. It's a big conversation at the Tompkins County level. There is mutual aid revenue comes to the village. Well, by all, yeah. 20% of the cost that we recoup comes later. I do not have that.
So the way our record keeping goes as far as the income goes is it all comes to T-Bird and then we give back the listings. So we've never really, we could get a proportion, right? What's what? Never done it, but happy to, they want to see it. Okay.
Declining mutual aid, not what I saw. Be reliant mutual aid. Practical. Several times, self-side angles comes out several times with approved. So declining mutual aid is a double-edged sword for EMS and fire. Small brotherhood, if you put it out there, for the income. We're declining it, the fire funds. And even from like,
And that's why I call it the nuclear option. The only reason I would consider it is we receive, and I'm not thinking of doing it for fire. For EMS, we receive mutual aid once a week, if that. We're providing it multiple times a week.
Yeah.
And this is one of those tricky,
Get the doctor, you get client,
I understand.
other agencies will do it. Call, they're on another call. in the week. Yeah, this rural EMS. You have to go to other departments, so say, thanks, so if you get a client us, we're going to.
Yeah. The issue becomes, the issue, Matt, the issue becomes that our current Tompkins County legislators, there are 3 or 4 of them who truly understand the tenuous nature of this system. The other 9 at the moment feel some version, and I want to be careful to repeat what they've said. I don't want to be accused of mind reading. They have indicated by their comments that they feel that any concern over EMS is a problem of the municipalities outside the town and the city of Ithaca. And that EMS in the town and the city of Ithaca is just fine. And there's a reluctance to assist the rural municipalities who, in the words of one legislator, and I'm paraphrasing, never stepped up to the plate with EMS in their municipality in the first place. It is necessary to force the legislators to understand that if Trumansburg and Dryden Ambulance weren't responding into the town and city of Ithaca, they would effectively have negligible response a significant portion of the time. And they don't understand that. And when Dryden Ambulance, who's also thinking of doing this, when Dryden Ambulance and Trumansburg Ambulance suggest that this would be something that we could have to resort to in the future and don't want to, we don't want to be the ones that someone dies because we didn't take the mutual aid call. But that if we resorted to that in the future, people would see how much of an issue there is. The response is that the response is that we're not believed. The people who see the statistics every day are not believed. And to me, that's incredible, but that is what it is. Now, the good news is there are going to be 9 new county legislators on January 2nd. Do they all need 3 years to come up to speed on this issue? Or will they be willing to act more quickly when they see maps like this? That's yet to be determined.
Part of it is whether or not they will consider, like I consider, ambulance to be a separate. I imagine every time you call 911 because you need medical care, so when you, it's an essential service, it's not a voluntary or optional one, right? And so I think that getting uniform acceptance of that needs to be a high priority. Like that Peter, our, the individual running already, right? For legislation, that here are of our current representative. But the reality is, it's an essential service that everybody needs to pay for. And I categorically will not support USC getting into a position that the town of Dryden is in. And if 40% of Dryden ambulance calls are going out of district, they are primarily being borne by town of Dryden taxpayers. That's not a scenario we would see. As it is, the percentage increase is built into our contracts, fire EMS, are eating up nearly 100% of the amount that we're allowed to increase our entire taxes. So I have to continuously, creatively work with our town departments to drive more revenue in other locations. Otherwise, if the burden falls on the tax, and it's not sustainable. It's not sustainable when you have city of taxpayers not paying a dime toward the ambulance service. That's just flat out unfair. And it's not fair that our neighbors in Enfield don't have ambulance service, they deserve ambulance service. But the model of trying, I can't imagine being on their comfort and trying to like jump into a contract that's an insurmountable financial challenge for them as well. So I have a lot of sympathy for them. And it's been very frustrating to feel like these very real concerns are all in my taxpayers, and I hope that certainly changes. But I think to pivot back to the question of revenue for out of district calls, you know, if it was 5% of calls are out of district, the revenue is probably negligible. But it would be really helpful just to understand what that revenue is, because where is it hitting in terms of the village not being over 10 years, $219,000. But I don't think it really is $219,000 when you start factoring in revenue that you are receiving for the department that is collectively funded by the representative. So I think that revenue is more important as the call volume increases, so that we understand where the numbers are collectively. Because, you know, I like I said, I don't want to see it getting to the 40% threshold. It's not affordable to do this revenue. I can't get more blood from the stone literally on the tax thing.
And just, I mentioned 20 minutes ago or so, and, you know, asking you all for your help. I don't know how much help, honestly, Covert and Hector can be in a Tompkins County discussion. But certainly the Ulysses reps. There was a proposal on the table, which the county tabled. I don't want to say they completely ignored it. That would have made a significant difference, in my opinion, to the amount of mutual aid that both Trumansburg and Dryden were taking on. And it wouldn't have cost nothing. It would have cost, you know, $1.5 million in year one, and probably $2 million a year going forward. But what's the proposed budget number? Is it 230 something? So we're talking about 1% of the count of Tompkins County's annual budget would go a long, long way to fixing the mutual aid issue. And the county happily spends lots and lots of money on lots and lots of programs, and I'm not suggesting they shouldn't. But I don't know if any of those programs are more important than getting an ambulance to someone's house when they're dying. So 1% is what we're talking about. 1% of Tompkins County's budget can make a big difference. And I think some real pointed advocacy is needed with all of our county legislators, particularly the ones who represent areas where there's a perceived, where there's no perceived problem. Because they would have a huge problem on day one if we stop taking those mutual aid calls. And with that, I have one last handout. I wouldn't call this good news, but it's less bad news. Rich. So I went back and looked, I went all the way back to 2011 and looked at our total EMS budget. 2011 to present, that's the bottom graph. And even with a couple of big jumps here and there, we're averaging just under 12%. We're averaging just under 12% annual increase in our EMS budget. The top graph, ironically, since 2011, there's been a market index based on healthcare. As you all know, I believe EMS is healthcare. And it is, if you do the math, 296 divided by 14, it's growing at about 22% a year. So the good news is, even though I believe EMS is healthcare, we're not growing quite as fast as the rest of the healthcare industry. That's small comfort that we're growing at about half the pace. But it's better than growing it faster than the pace, I guess. So that's the best I could, that's the best.
You're comparing this to the index of EMS growth.
Right. Because EMS is healthcare. No, but I was looking at what is the healthcare industry costs? What has it escalated over the same time period?
So, usually the benefits without stop.
It's a value of the healthcare sector, which, where is that value coming from? It's coming from what they charge. So healthcare costs, where do those costs go? They go to the corporations that are charging those fees.
Yeah.
Those costs are escalating at over 20% a year. EMS, our costs, because we don't have to make a profit primarily, that's the difference, is escalating at about half that. If we were, you know, United Health or Aetna, and we had to build in a profit margin, you would see 11 point whatever percent be much higher. So because we're a municipality, which means we, by definition, operate at a loss annually, we don't have the same cost escalation, but it's still not nothing. We have a, we have an SUV, which has some, Joel will have to talk about what is actually on board. It's a non-transporting vehicle. Some of those second calls I mentioned earlier, when an ambulance is out of district and Joel can cobble together a response for the second call, a lot of that is that vehicle. Now, we're not always running the second ambulance.
I've seen other larger cities that got Medicabs and with that pass. Want to throw it out there and see if it's worthwhile. That some frequent flyers in town, and see if we can do anything about that. Guiding some of the national cars was an issue one time. There is still some issue. Something that's
Yeah.
So it's two separate issues. The Medicab issue sort of dovetails with like a community paramedicine type concept, right? Where you're essentially running either transport between facilities, hospital facilities, or doing some proactive healthcare in the community. Paramedicine, community paramedicine, that is something that has kind of stalled out a little bit for our funding sources. And we had pursued a number of years ago doing interfacility transfers through UCMC, and unfortunately that didn't fall, or that did fall through. So that didn't really go anywhere. I think the piece that is interesting is the question of frequent flyers, and that really gets at a lot of what Rowan was talking about with the county, right? That's a lot of the purpose of that service, is to try and get those flyers, the frequent flyers, which is a rough term, but the idea that we can kind of take some of that burden off of ALS crews is really, I mean, I think that was one of the inspirational sort of catalyst ideas behind the county service. I think, I mean, my sense is certainly that they're serving that function, although they also don't get down into the weeds entirely.
So, yeah, so the current, just a quick overview for those who aren't that familiar, the current county program, Rapid Medical Response, they call it RMR, is staffed with non-paramedics only. So I don't want to get too far out into the weeds. Happy to answer questions if you have them, but Tompkins County has what's called an agency number, which is not the same as a certificate of need. A certificate of need allows for an agency to operate an ambulance with paramedics. An agency number simply allows them to respond with EMTs. Ironically, they have some paramedics on staff who are not allowed to use their paramedic level skills on a call. They can only respond as a. They are also non-transporting. So their role has really been defined as, we'll get to these calls first. And if we don't need a transport or it's a low emergency call, the ambulance doesn't need to show up. It's worked very well if they're taking over 1,000 calls a year at this point of these lower, we'll call them lower level or less acute calls. However, that program, the county only budgeted for it to run, is it 7 to 7? Is it 12 hours a day? 12 hours a day, Monday through Friday, no weekends. One of the proposals that the county tabled was to simply expand that existing program to 24 hours a day plus weekends. And the county has not been willing to do that. The version that I've been advocating for with the county would add paramedic level care with or without transporting capacity. You don't have to start buying ambulances, but if a paramedic can render care, then perhaps a transport isn't needed, which saves the ambulance for other locations. Or if transport is still needed, there's the life-saving function has been achieved. So right now, they are able to take frequent flyer calls and other low-level, less emergent calls. As long as the individual having the incident does it during business hours, Monday through Friday.
So I'm sorry, did someone else? So one other piece that I just wanted to bring everyone's mind back to is that a number of months ago, we met with most of you, certain half of the people in the room, to discuss switching billing companies. So we're not really going to get into it today when we're going through the budget, because this is really the cost side of the budget. But I would encourage you all to reach out as you're putting together your budgets, talk about the revenue, or to look and see at your own receipts, because it appears to us at least that change was as effective as we hoped it would be. That we are recouping a significantly greater percentage of revenue. How exactly that will turn out specifically, sort of yet to be seen. You know, with this little data, right? It's only been half a year. And some of that has been sorting out the details, right? But I would encourage you all to look at that. So a lot of this is, you know, the picture is multifaceted. As Vernon points out, this is healthcare, and it is healthcare in the sense also that we bill for it. So obviously you all set your own billing policies. But priority one has effectively, I think, or at least appears at this point in a preliminary way, to be effective in the sense that they are better at implementing the policies in our whole billing service. So I would encourage you all, as you're looking, you know, you can't go, you know, it's still a stone. You can't go water from stone still, but we're getting there a little bit. But with that, I am hoping we can sort of turn our attention to the budget.
Just want to add one thing. Joel was able to pull up mutual aid. Now, remember, our fiscal year starts June 1. So June, July, August, through our first quarter of our fiscal year, we have recouped just under $5,000 in mutual aid reimbursements. So it's
Year to date,
2020 calendar year, even worse. Just under $5,000 calendar year to date from mutual aid. What's been billed is closer to 60,000. That recoup ratio is what we're hoping can improve with the new billing company. But a lot of those mutual aid calls will be Medicare and Medicaid, which just don't reimburse very much. $180 for Medicaid for this ride is, I guess, not enough. But that's the year-to-date number.
Well, I'm hoping that, before we get the budget, so we are watching, in terms of revenue, it does look like it's a little bit up, the budgeting for a little bit up, it's really insecure. Budgeting in for, you know,
The first year, very delicate. Yeah, agreed.
So what I'm hopeful is that a contingency of us can meet maybe 6 months from now to look at the year, the calendar year, to see how it is, because I'm starting to have conversations with other communities who are recouping more money from all than we are. And we really, I think we need. I think requires, especially for cities in the village, to be doing coordination because of our population. But if healthcare costs continue to go up 10% and we're not I think we need to start collectively talking about, hey, it's the insurance companies in a lot of cases who aren't paying. It's not necessarily someone just writing a check. And I think we might need to consider collectively comparing our rates of reimbursement, even within the company. They're probably in the last by all accounts, with how other municipalities are doing it and their policies, because again, if costs keep going up and revenue barely goes up or just a little bit more, we're still caught in that cycle, right?
Well, the bottom line is no matter how good you are at collecting, if the fees that you're charging initially are substantially below market, right? You're never gonna catch up.
Right.
Yeah, I think I put a note, I'm happy to check in 6 months. I mean, I think we have not, when was the last time we evaluated billing rates? Was it 2 years ago?
2022.
Okay, so
I have more again.
yeah,
That's what the.
great.
Another thing I just want to mention too is currently with 188% increase. In what we have. The other part to it is I have visibility now. That really does help me look at full past better. One of that is I can actually see what's expected revenue as of 3% insurance companies. So even if the money isn't here now, it might not be here for 3 months to see what is expected. And I'm happy to give you oral access for the calls.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Area, so feel free to reach out to me and I'll help.
Okay, great, that's great. Yeah.
Give you some stability.
Yeah, exactly, last year, right count, that was hard. The last calendar year, so.
But we have a lot of options with Bill. We are very kind to our residents. And so there's a lot of movement back to be had. That's positive.
And just to note quickly that we have historically very intentionally had very generous charity care policies. We have intentionally been below market. I mentioned that mostly for you. But so moving into the budget. I don't really intend to go line by line the way we did in the fire budget. There's just more lines here and there's been more of a broad shift. I'll just point out kind of the high points. As you saw in Vern's first handout, we were substantially over budget last year. A lot of that comes from, as you pointed out, personnel, legal. Those are two costs that we can't really fight and they just sort of are what they are, which is fortunate, although I'll circle back to personnel. But another piece of that is that we've had to renew contracts for monitor leases and other fairly major equipment that we were not anticipating doing. So what you'll see in this budget is a lot of Joel and I, and we mentioned this last year, of course, grappling with kind of the deferred, I don't want to call it maintenance, but deferred replacement schedules for a lot of our smaller gear. So I think we've been fairly proactive historically about replacement schedules for vehicles, right? For ambulances, for fire trucks. Those things are fairly easy, high ticket items that are easy to plan out. What we've been less good about is our monitors, our stretchers, things like that. So you'll see here a lot of trying to catch up. We were also doing this last year. So this is kind of a continuation. And then on top of that, also trying to more efficiently staff. Joel has been trying for the last couple of years to really push hiring and a shift generally towards per diems to the greatest extent possible, which brings me to personnel, sorry, Rich. The first two lines you will see very little change, overall a decrease. In particular, this represents that shift that I just mentioned to per diems as much as we can, although we are still obviously heavily relying on staff. But that is really the reason that that's where it is. Scanning down, you'll see the next, if you just look at the percent change column, that's really where I'm going to hit the high spots here. So you'll see 119. That is contractual. That is really a shift of resources from different leases that we had and really just being honest about what goes where. And like I mentioned, I believe, Joel, correct me if I'm wrong here, but shifting the monitor leases out of that line and then shifting all of the other annual contracts into that line. So that line is, for the first time ever, an actual approximation of the actual contracts that we actually pay annually. I'm going to skip for now the patient billing line, going down to the 76% increase line, which is the vehicle maintenance line. That represents primarily an increase because we now have the fly car, and because we are kind of on the last legs of our ambulances, right? So we also have a scheduled replacement that is coming up. But until we get there, we have to continue to maintain a fairly old field. Moving down then to the 86% increase line, pager radio gear repair. This is us primarily, as I mentioned at the top, trying to catch up with radios in particular, which are very expensive. Joel, how much is a radio?
86%, that's the monitor lease.
Oh, excuse me, I'm sorry. So that is us, as I mentioned, the monitor leases that we have to renew in our last year. So this is one of those costs that the village just eats because we weren't expecting it. Now it needs to be in budget. Why was I looking at the radios? Radios, I guess we're keeping the same. Those are also, just for the record, something that we're trying to catch up on, although I guess we can do that a little bit more manageably. The rest you will see are just tied to personal costs, right? So they're FICA, et cetera. We are also trying to increase our reserve payments. Basically 5,000 here and there. Fundamentally, the idea is to sort of push us to where we actually need to be. We are still probably 15 grand off that line on both equipment and, well, maybe not equipment. Equipment is probably 10 grand off, and then vehicle is probably 15 off of where we would like to be stable. But we are sensitive to, you know, the increases in our budget having a ripple effect in all of the town budgets. So we are trying to be as incremental as we can there. That is the high points. Happy to have questions, happy to dig deeper. I don't want to belabor something that might be not interesting. But if there is anything, any questions, happy to dig deeper. Where's the monitor leads? Yeah. So that is a line. So we have a monitor, right? That monitors your, like, the performance of your body. Cardiac monitor. And the lease is just a lease. Yeah.
Right, the structures. And you'll see that the reserve for that was reduced, so it's being looked at as an expenditure instead of something to budget for in reserve.
What's driving overtime with not the staffing fluctuations and position openings?
Yeah, I mean, nationwide, just like many other industries, there's. Tompkins County, there's a little area, there is no. Screen for people to become providers. And they want to come into kind of like therapies, there's not, with few exceptions. There's not, we're not producing providers, I just haven't. Assessing what's our issue. But last year, the biggest driver was unforeseen circumstances for 2 full-timers out of the. So that's certainly.
When just, and for context here, we have 4 paramedics. So 2, I mean, that's 50% of our staff are gone, right? I mean, it's the same thing that happens in rural call responses where we have very few, but they're very far apart. So each call takes up a, you know, disproportionate amount of time. Staffing is the same way. We're a small service. So you lose 2 people. Right. So that's a substantial thing. And it just means the swings, the surges in our capacity and our costs are.
So, Joel, what do you think is the reason that we're having an increase with the billing?
Increasing what?
And revenue.
I think it's just, really it just comes down to the billing codes practices, I think.
I don't think people are maybe not actually accepting people yet.
No, so that's actually there. Probably about 5 months ago, the law was passed, the Direct Pay Act. So that's no longer the case. Insurance companies don't send. The biggest change, I think, is with the communication and this live reporting that our company uses. So now if a call cannot be billed, I know about it that day or the following day. So you flag the corresponding quickly, and it gives us a chance to correct it. We're medics, we would get that information
6 months later.
at least 3 or at least 45 days later. At that point, our ability to bill is not out there. So if we forget to put a date on the signature, it's fine. So, you know, we have to correct those issues. That's.
Yeah, Colbert only has like 3 or 4 outstanding from the previous. Do you have any outstanding?
I don't have that great data. I think that's a good thing, but I think we'll have relaxed.
Other questions?
I don't need it. It would be wonderful to know just for our education purposes, and I know she was public, so I have to be in the same. For us to know what percentage of calls. Maybe be different line of something that are non-transport, non-bill, just when you have.
Sure.
I understand. I'm sure, but I was trying to pick up the spot for doing it. Cause it helps understand the service that's really being subsidized by the tax base area versus whether it's
Yeah, another challenge that a lot of people don't understand is if somebody calls 911 to show up, we cannot decline it, regardless of what's. So if they want to be transported to Hackney, we are obligated. By all means, please rest assured that we do everything of our so it's like that, but then I do have ourselves. We go as far as we can. We kind of dedicate that.
If there's any other questions that come to mind, we can come back to this page. The next page has the contract splits and changes. Some of you will recall, Ben and I had spent several years trying to come up with a formula that might smooth the changes a little bit and not rely so heavily on call volume. We just weren't able to make a formula work the way assessments work in fire. So you'll be able to see that to my earlier spreadsheet, our year-over-year costs have escalated 11.7% a year over the last 14 years. So we're a little under that this year at, call it 8%, 7.9. But that'll mean different things to each municipality based on call volume breakout. Questions or comments on the contract splits?
What would be interesting? Fire.
You do meet with cars regularly, but you do. Yeah. I mean, they're still going to cars regularly. Yeah, yeah, sure. Happy to.
Nothing from our friends to the north.
No.
You thought you retired from healthcare years and years ago. Well, appreciate everyone's time. Any questions come up after the fact, of course, you can always email Ben or myself or Joel or Jessica, Ben or Marcia, or any of a number of people. Does the village board have any other business?
No, I have not.
Would entertain the motion to adjourn.
So.
We have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.